Today's scripture consists of two readings, and they're both coming from the translation of the Bible called The Voice. It might be new to you. It was new to me. I thought we would try something different. The first reading will be from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10. And the second reading will be John chapter 14, verse 27. And I'm going to read them together without pausing. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of grace, who has called you to his everlasting presence through Jesus the Anointed, will restore you, support you, strengthen you, and ground you. My peace is the legacy I leave to you. I don't give gifts like those of this world. Do not let your heart be troubled or fearful. Thus ends the scripture readings from 1 Peter 5, verse 10, and John 14, verse 27. Unsettled much? It's been a long time. It's been nearly 3 years since the pandemic started. And we've come a long way, but things are still not quite what many of us would refer to as normal, are they? We've gone from the Great Resignation to quiet quitting to quick quitting and beyond. A new generation of homeschoolers was born. The term Zoomers entered the chat, and remote jobs are now in high demand and not going away anytime soon. Virtual doctor's visits are now a routine thing. I mean, we have some good stuff, but we've had some challenges. We've negotiated supply chain shortages. We've installed solar panels on our roofs and purchased electric cars to circumvent rising energy prices. We've watched rising temperatures and extreme weather become more forefront in our lives. We've gotten our shots, taken off our masks, and started venturing back out into the world, which continues to turn in spite of some terrible conflicts and struggles that people are enduring. On top of that, we've got our own stress to manage. We've got our spouses and children who have issues, maybe anxiety. We are assessing the learning losses in schools. We're facing rising food costs and interest rates. And maybe, just maybe, you're right now wondering, when are we ever going to get off this crazy roller coaster? With so much change in the outside world, we've had a lot to adapt to, and we might be feeling a little bit of internal discombobulation right now, and that's okay. Last week, we heard Reverend Jackson speak of our deep spiritual need to follow our Christ consciousness, that inner eternal part of us that is our peace that passeth understanding. If only we let ourselves go there now and again. We will always have demands pulling on us from the outer world, and it seems like a lot of that is happening now. So it's critical that we pause and give some serious thought on how we can keep ourselves on an even spiritual keel. Serenity now. We've all heard that phrase, this too shall pass. And our higher self, I think, is on board with this. It knows that's true. But our earthly self, our human self, checks the clock at midnight, looks at the to-do list, realizing it's not done, and might be wondering, how are we going to keep doing this day after day after day? The world we live in is intense. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's chaotic. It's joyous. It's thrilling. It's pretty awesome to be alive on planet Earth. But we have to figure out how to maintain our spiritual homeostasis, how to keep coming back to our spiritual center so we can at least temporarily return to our peace and renew and reset ourselves from the inside out. We're here to be challenged, to grow and evolve, but I think we can all agree that sometimes we just need a time out. I don't know about you, but I've had a very past intense week just now, and more than a few reasons are responsible. And it was kind of interesting because it was sort of like the week just never really ended, and each day just kind of rolled into the next and into the next, pressing me forward with it, like being steamrolled from one deadline into the next with no recovery time in between. I'm just now catching my breath. And we've all had these moments. It's not a great feeling, but it happens. And I had what I felt was no time to stop and take a nice deep meditation. And even when there were moments when I thought I could get away with it and close the door, the household was too noisy. It just wasn't right. Things just weren't set up for success in that regard. But what I did decide to do was be intentional with my time when and where I could. I looked at the dog looked at me. I looked at the dog looked at me. The dog said, and I said, oh, let's go snuggle, because I needed a dog break. So I took a dog break and I scratched my dog and I looked into her eyes and she looked into mine, and we had a mindful meeting of the soul's moment, because I really needed that. And maybe she did too. But I realized we have to take mindful moments. On Wednesday, after I did my tutoring session with my student, I took a break and I went outside in the backyard. I said, I don't have time for much, but I'm going in the backyard. I'm going to look at my plants in my garden. And I wanted to go pick some of this one particular plant that I use as an herb in my soaps that I make. Some of you guys know I make soap. I picked the leaves, I brought them in, I washed them a lot of times. I rinsed them, I rubbed all the dirt off them. I just looked at each one of them and I unfurled them and laid them out really deliberately on these baker's racks so that they could dry. I took that moment and I just was there with nature. And then I turned on the ceiling fan and went back to work because I had to go back to work. On Thursday evening, I took an hour off to facilitate a get-together with some like-minded souls online. And for just a little bit, it was great because we were there in our own sacred space of our own creation and our own beautiful healing energies, sharing stories, sharing that energy together. So I purposefully decided I was taking back those few moments where I could, because I knew I had entirely too much going on. I knew I was overstressed. I knew I was overtired and feeling the burnout. But at least I could take a few minutes back here and there for the sake of my soul and probably my mental health and emotional health too. Right now, we keep hearing the buzzword of self-care. And, you know, life is about compromising, and sometimes we just get what we get, but we do have to take a moment and remember ourselves. Now, homeostasis is a neat word. I love that word, homeostasis. Homeostasis, if you don't know, it's the physiologic mechanism by which an organism maintains a stable internal environment in spite of whatever's going on in its external environment around it, okay? Homeostasis involves self-regulation of internal processes. We have to maintain certain biological set points, like, oh, you know, oxygen in our blood so that we can live and our brain can stay alive and our heart can pump. We need to regulate blood glucose to feed our cells, but not overwhelm them with sugar. On a spiritual level, this idea of homeostasis is kind of a nice one also, because we need to return to a state of inner peace now and again, to reset our nervous system, to reset our outlook, to reset our perspective, to remind us that we're not alone, that we are constantly connected to and a part of Source. We need a spiritual timeout. Maintaining a healthy sense of self-awareness and resetting now and then is good for us. That spiritual timeout fills our cup so that we can go back out into the outer world again and put something positive out there and make a difference and do something and shine a light and be a light. And when we're at our spiritual best, we remember to honor the body, the mind, and our spirit, and allow all of them the chance to rest, renew, heal, recuperate. Even if we have to carve out a mindful moment in the middle of the constant driving pace that seems to be life on planet Earth, we're here to learn through everybody we interact with, even as we're affected by them in return. Too much interaction with the outer world can drain us. It drains that spiritual cup, it empties it to the last drop, but we can refill it by playing, resting, meditating, connecting with our source, helping us to feel a little less unsettled, a little less unbalanced, a little more even-keeled and stable and steady, so we can stay the course, as Reverend Jackson tells us all the time. Are you feeling unsettled lately? If so, this could be why. Being self-aware is the first step to making spiritual progress. And the opposite, also comes with consequences. Too much withdrawal from the world, too much being in your mind, too much being in your head, and too much meditation even. If you were just staying in meditation 24/7, you might become a little floaty and dissociated and disconnected from people around you and your relationships. And we know that it's all about homeostasis, physical and spiritual homeostasis. As divine metaphysicians, we know that the point of life, with all its beauty, chaos, wonder, challenge, intensity, is to teach us and help us to grow spiritually. But, now and then we're the ones up at night too, worrying about stuff, challenged with things, perhaps thinking about bills, struggling with relationship challenges, looking in the mirror and dealing with mental health issues. We're human. Sometimes it might feel like we're not meeting our own high expectations. Well, I should have done this. I should have meditated. I should have done this. I know what to do. I know what to do. But in this moment, I don't always remember what to do. And we have to be careful about putting too much burden on ourselves. You hear this phrase kicked around a lot. God only gives you what you're capable of handling. Well, that's a loaded phrase because it kind of implies that we should just be able to carry any burden at all that's ever handed to us. And I think it lacks a little nuance because some of us have heard that and internalized it, and we now are at the point where we don't feel like we can relax, even when we should. We have time to rest, but we have to fill that time with being busy. We have to keep moving, keep doing, keep working, like a shark that keeps swimming and never stops, because if it does stop, it will not be able to breathe and it might die. So we have to check that, because I think the truth is that we were never intended to do this one-sided kind of living. We're not intended to go this road alone, not without God, not without each other. It doesn't really make sense. Life on Earth is too big, too intense to be negotiated by one person acting alone with no support whatsoever. I mean, we've all gotten a shoulder to lean on by somebody somewhere in our life. We've all needed to take time and find our peace and find our source and think about who we are and why we're here. So this is a huge spiritual lesson. We're never alone, but sometimes we just don't realize that we're never alone. Source is always present, but our awareness may not be. In her book, The River of Life, How to Live in the Flow, Marilyn Autry says the law of evolution guarantees a constant unfolding of progression in all of nature. Evolution, evolving, implies a getting better or smarter in some way, doesn't it? She describes the law of evolution as the things within being expressed outwardly. Growth and spiritual evolution are guaranteed by this law, she says, but the rate of growth depends on the conscious awareness of the individual. There's where the rubber hits the road, right? So when we work to become more self-aware, we will accelerate our spiritual growth. When we manifest the internal spiritual outlook we want and we change ourselves in the way we think we need to be updated or changed, then we will evolve, and we might do it quicker and quicker if we're getting good at this thing. We will acquire wisdom and spiritual maturity and reach for higher understanding and greater awareness in our life. So all of this elevates our higher self, right? It raises our spiritual vibration. And what it really does, if we want to wrap back to Reverend Jackson's sermon last week, what it really does is it makes us a more ideal vessel for the Christ consciousness to work in and through us and out into the world. An even settled mind and body is the best remedy for the craziness of the world, because it allows us to be receptive to God's grace and allow it to work in and through us. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of grace, who has called you through Jesus the Anointed, will restore you, support you, strengthen you, and ground you. My peace is the legacy I leave to you. I don't give gifts like those of this world. Do not let your heart be troubled or fearful. I noticed that word after you have suffered for a little while. Notice it doesn't say while you're suffering or when you're in the midst of it, in the thick of things, because what tends to happen is we tend to be in the now. We're shifting into that gear of right here, right now, and we're dealing with whatever's coming at us, whatever situation and energies are in the room right now. That doesn't always mean we're ready to have our spiritual respite and go back to our homeostasis and meditate, because we might be dealing with something right now. It says after you have suffered for a little while, meaning when you are at a point where you can put this in perspective and you can step back, when you have that breathing space to step back. That's when meditation becomes one of our best self-correcting mechanisms of spiritual homeostasis. At that point, we can consciously go within and connect to source and sit in the power and peace of the Christ consciousness. We can nudge our physical imbalances back toward a better state. We can nudge our spiritual systems back to a more positive state when we meditate. We are connected to and an integral part of something so beautiful and so much bigger than us. We know we're here for a reason. We become better attuned to cycles around us, intuitions, synchronicities. Meditation is that special spiritual place where we meet ourselves. We look at that mirror and we can put life sufferings and stresses into that bigger context. But what about when we are spiritually unsettled and can't quite make the time to meditate in the way our soul really needs us to? Well, that's where the everyday mindful moment comes in, right? A mindful moment claimed in the name of your soul is better than nothing. We can walk the dog, we can wash the dishes, we can read a book, we can take just a moment and look at the fall leaves and breathe the cool air and say, okay, I can't do what I want, but I'm going to do what I can do. We can text a friend, we can send our mom a funny photo, we can make a connection with somebody, even just if it's touch and go, that's okay. Sometimes I send funny memes to people and you might get a text from me and you go, what's that? And then off I go. I had my mindful moment with you. That's what happened. We can brew a cup of tea. We can sip it with a little bit of gratitude for the hot water. Oh, it feels good. We can take a shower, give thanks for indoor plumbing. There's a lot of ways to practice the presence of God in silly, mundane seeming ways. Even if it's just for a second or a minute. Spiritual homeostasis isn't, after all, about balance, perfect balance, teetering on that edge perfectly all the time. It's about falling off that edge, falling off that balance, and having the mechanism to put yourself back, knowing what to do, having self-correcting mechanisms in place to nudge ourselves back into a less unsettled state. I think the reality, or I feel that the reality of our experience on Earth is that we're spiritual beings and we've been given a physical body. Here's your body, plunk. We have an outer world and an inner world to contend with, don't we? We feel things inside us as we experience things outside us, and it's part and parcel of the package. It's our reality, and I don't feel that we need to deny this or retreat from it. When things get overwhelming, it's okay to step back. But in general, there's that phrase, life is not a spectator sport. And we have to be careful about the nuance of saying things like we can be in this world, but not of it. Well, yes, we can. We can adopt a detached viewpoint when we need to and step back and say, okay, what's the lesson here? What am I learning? What do I need to know from this? But then when we're done with that omniscient viewpoint, we need to step back into the body and say, okay, what do you need, body? What needs can we meet for you? Because we took care of the spiritual, we addressed that, now we need to address the physical. Our approach to life and living can be dynamic. It can include all these things. It can include our emotional, physical, and mental and spiritual states, because if we ignore one at the expense of the other, life becomes unbalanced. We should acknowledge and love all aspects of ourselves, because we made a decision to incarnate into this dualistic plane of experience, right? We are the spirit, but for a moment, we're also the body. So if the human part of us is being challenged emotionally, mentally, physically, if we're experiencing human challenges, I feel like it's part of our spiritual learning. And we need to address this and not ignore it. This is why self-care has become such an important thing in mental health, because we can't ignore all the human side at the expense of the spiritual side. And sometimes we get our perspective back and we might realize that what we perceive right here and now is suffering or pain or something that we don't like. It's uncomfortable. It's unsettling, maybe because it's a harbinger of growth that's just on the horizon. Because change is a constant on planet Earth. Nothing stays the same forever. The point of being here and living in a human body is not to allow ourselves to be completely overwhelmed, although it happens, and that's life. It's the point of being here with all this is to reconcile it, to reconcile ourselves with the outer chaos and intensity and beauty and wonder and awesomeness, and to reconcile that with the eternal peace that's within us, that love, that something that's bigger than all of that. We can embrace this individuated part of us, this God particle that we've incarnated as to do something cool in the world and play an illuminating role and make it a better place. Do you know that we carry inside us the perfect antidote to life on Earth? The perfect antidote and remedy for the seemingly all-consuming condition of life is right inside. The perfect peace is right within us, waiting patiently for us to remember it. The Christ consciousness never sleeps, although we need to. It's always there for us. We are a portal to an eternal dimension and to an unchanging universal love. And we can keep this portal open mindfully by remembering to activate that homeostasis, that physical and spiritual homeostasis, by mindfully claiming our moments as we need them in our daily life. I'm going to go pick my weeds now because I need to do something to just be in the now. We need to stop also beating ourselves up when we're not able to meet our own expectations, when we're not able to meditate and be in blissful nirvana 24/7 and thinking that we should be by now because gosh darn it, we've been on this path for 20 years or whatever. You know, we're still human. And remember, scripture says, my peace is the legacy I leave to you. I don't give gifts like those of this world. I don't give you extra time. I don't give you extra things. I don't give you extra money. I give you peace. Do not let your heart be troubled or fearful. So let's claim the peace that is our legacy, even if we have to do it one mindful moment at a time, scraping it out of our day, even if we have to do it under conditions of uncertainty, even if we have to do it under conditions of suffering where we're having a hard time. Our soul can't wait. Serenity now. Let's all just do the best we can and keep going. Namaste.